This interview has been tape recorded, and today it's my intention to interview Simon Willett. We're on X Job Downloaded, and I'm looking forward to this, Simon, because I don't think you realise what exciting things you've done.
No, I'm looking forward to it too, Paul. It's a great pleasure to be able to do it and sit and answer questions unrehearsed, off the cuff. And exactly, I think those of us who served in the job, we don't realise how qualified we are with our experience, our knowledge. And yeah, I think that's become apparent since I retired 4.5 years ago. You do realise more when you've left, I think, when you've retired, just what great things you've done.
Oh, yeah.
And things that perhaps you didn't realise were great, but nonetheless, it's a skill that you acquire as an officer, as a serving officer.
Absolutely. And the skills that you acquire, and we talk about this all the time, but your decision-making, your customer focus, it carries through life. And Simon, you're one of life's gentlemen, and I've known you for a long time, and I mean that with all my heart, because you're a nice guy. Although I wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of you, but you're a thoroughly nice guy. So what year did you join the police?
I joined September the 5th, 1988.
Isn't it funny how we always remember the actual day?
Yeah. September
the 5th.
Yes, and it's funny how I joined, really, because it was never an intention. And if you'd like me to just briefly tell you how that came about. Never an intention, never an aspiration. But I have an agricultural background and did an apprenticeship at Ernest Doe and Sons at Alting. Fantastic job, lovely people, still many of whom I see today. Then I was asked to go to somewhere else, which I did. And then it was in 1987, a friend of mine from Danbury, I'm a Danbury lad, a friend of mine, his cousin, who was also from Danbury, the cousin, met a lovely girl out in San Francisco where he was working at the time. Long story short, his cousin, who was still living in Danbury, and I were invited to the wedding. So I went to San Francisco with Paul, and I'd never gone beyond a day trip to France prior to that. So when I talk about an adventure, it was absolutely mind-blowing. Great big opulent wedding. Mimi's parents were both successful lawyers in San Francisco, and that was reflected in this beautiful marble floor, a string quartet when we arrived. It was just something else. I'd never seen anything like it. And my abiding memory is when we landed in San Francisco at night, and we saw this fantastic skyline, lights, these huge skyscrapers. It blew me away. So consequently, 3 weeks of that, and I came back and I was very unsettled. And a friend of mine who I was working with at the time, he'd applied for the job and he was successful, and he joined just a wee bit before me. But that was sufficient for me to say I need to do something else. So that's why I joined the job. I needed to do something radically different. And thank goodness, I'm a great believer in fate, and that was meant to be. So,
and your friend joined Essex Police?
He did, Roy Keys, who was on traffic, a great chap, a very talented mechanic, agricultural mechanic, very talented chap indeed. And so the rest is history.
Are you an agricultural mechanic? Or is it?
No, I was in the parts, I was in the stores. So I did a City and Guilds qualification at Doe's, and
Colin Doe, was he?
Yes, I know Colin Doe. I still see him. Very lovely man. He always looked after me. A great chap, a gentleman, a true gentleman.
I've met him a couple of times at cricket. Yeah. Very nice.
Nice chap, yeah.
So you've joined Essex Police. Where did you go to first? Where was your first posting?
I went to Colchester on shift, D shift, a fantastic shift.
Who was there then? Who's the governor?
Right, it was Dave Mirthwaite. Was my first inspector. Good chap. And I can remember...
Was Bully a skipper then?
No, he'd just left then. He'd left to go to drug squad. Exactly. Yeah. I missed him just by not very long, I don't think. But great times, as I suppose our formative years in the job should be. Nothing but very happy. It was brilliant. It was absolutely fantastic. But words of wisdom. I recall Dave Mirthwaite. I went in one night to see him before I actually joined the shift. And words that have stayed with me since. And this is as true today as it has ever been. If somebody needs the police, they ring the police. There is no alternative, generally speaking. And he used the analogy, it's not like if you ring the AA when you're broken down on the side of the road, the AA give poor service, you can ring the RAC or a multitude of other organisations. The public don't have that option. There is no alternative. If you ring the police because somebody's breaking into your house, for example, and they get a poor response, there is no alternative.
Absolutely right.
And that's stuck with me. Wise words, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you. He's funny because I won't embarrass my brother, who you know, but we'd known Dave Murthwaite for an awful long time. And he was a traffic motorcyclist and all that sort of stuff. And I passed out of Ashford on the Thursday. It was Maundy Thursday, 1987. And on the Saturday, we'd been to a family event and we're coming back from Chadwell Heath and we go for a kebab at Istanbul Kebab.
Oh, yeah.
And these two fellas decided that they're going to have a fight in there, start smashing the place up. And I remembered, criminal damage. I hadn't even walked the streets at that point. And these two boys, Glenn and I, we end up in a fight in the street outside the Istanbul Delight. And Leo Sayer and Tony Allison, they turn up, handcuff me.
Oh, dear.
Honestly, they handcuff me. Oh. And Dave Murthwaite, who we know, he turns up and he looks at me. And I vividly remember him. He's got his head in his hands, sitting at a police car, because I was a probationer. As it happens, I hadn't done anything wrong. These boys had done it, and they'd smashed it up, and they owned a car place out at Birch, and they were big friends with a detective sergeant who subsequently lost his job.
Oh.
But yeah, so it's quite an interesting dynamic, because we're talking about the same people. So, do you know what I remember about Colchester, Nick? The smell.
Yes.
The smell of the bleach, where Alice the cleaner had been in and out, and
I remember that. I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's one of those things you talk about and you can smell it again.
Yeah, I know.
The other thing that I can recall in the good old Nick, fantastic times, and I can recall when we were on nights, downstairs in the parade room and the control room and so on, and upstairs I remember there was a Narpo disco or some sort of function, social function taking place, and the floor... You talk about the smell of the bleach and so on. I can hear the creaking of the floors as those good old retired officers and their friends and family. Reg Shelley, bless him. Reg was most definitely there. And the floor was creaking and you could hear the music. And I thought, my goodness me, good on them.
They're going to come through in a minute. Yeah. It's that old bar. I mean, and I know it was destroyed in later years, the sociability side, because of certain things, certain skullduggery by a minority of people, but that was what built you as a team to socialise with your peers. You knew who you could trust and rely on, and I've used this before in other podcasts. Even if you didn't get on with people, if you turned out to a 10-9, which is an emergency for an officer's in danger, even people you didn't like would still turn out.
Yeah.
It was that was what a proper team was all about.
Indeed.
So you're at Colchester, you're in uniform. How long were you there for?
I was there until December 92, which is when I went on CID. So I remained on D shift throughout that time with... You know what it's like at a divisional station. People come and go. There was the mainstay there, but others were promoted, specialised. Probationers would come and join, but each and every one, great people. We were extremely fortunate. And as life progresses and your career progresses, it's fair to say not everybody you work with, and that's reflected in life, but not everybody you work with you get on with. But we were very fortunate that each and every one that joined the shift to replace a good person that left one way or another, they fitted the bill marvellously, and great team. So
did you move across to the new Nick in the interim before you went on CID?
Yes. When I started, I think it was the 2nd of January 89, I actually started at the the old police station in
Yep.
Queen Street. And then I believe towards the end of that year, September, October time, I think that's when we all moved over to the new one. And of course, that was brand spanking new.
And we still call it the new Nick.
We do, despite that.
Despite the fact it's 30 years ago, mate.
Yeah.
How do you feel about your age now?
Goodness me, another reminder.
What year were you that you joined? How old were you?
I was 23.
23.
Yeah, I was born
21,
65, so 23. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, I'd done my apprenticeship and worked somewhere else for another 3 and a bit years. So, I had a bit of life experience outside the job, which I think always served me well.
And you had a good nickname as well, didn't you, mate?
Did I?
Yeah.
Remind me, Paul.
Was it cement mixer or something like that?
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, that gullible Simon, naive. Just getting the cement mixer. I promise I won't turn it on.
Turn it on.
And guess what happened? I think that's
Hilarious.
Yeah, bless them.
What was the highlight of being in uniform?
I think wearing the uniform, actually, and as twee as that may sound, I actually, and this is so sincere, I can remember they were the days when, and I spent a stint on foot patrol, which I enjoyed immensely. Got to know lots of people, shopkeepers, doormen, bar people, and so it goes, and of course store detectives. But the one thing I remember, and I would do it every single time I could, and that was to wear my tunic.
Oh, yeah.
I found that, and that's an abiding memory going back all those years now, going to uniform stores, clothing stores at headquarters, getting measured up. And of all the uniform we had, the shiny buttons and the creases that you had to put in, I was immensely proud. And that's a word that's thrown around very liberally these days, but I was incredibly proud to be measured up and also to wear it. And not so much now, I'm sure, but at the time, you saw lots and lots of tourists in Colchester, and they'd very often ask you to stand so they could take a photograph of you.
Poster boy.
So exactly.
Simon the poster boy.
So I think at that time I may well have adorned a few mantelpieces across Europe in my shiny button. So seriously, that was a great thing. I felt 10 feet tall to wear that.
Yeah, and I was the same, mate. And I couldn't even get the tunic over my bloody over my right arm now. But
no,
but yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that pride, and I'm sure that there is still the pride in the job. It's just a different type of pride. The day that you joined and the day that I joined, there were people saying that the job had it. TJF and but they are people that joined in 1960. So you joined in 88. Somebody would have done 30 years. They joined in 1958. That's the reality of this. And we're looking at modern history. Mm. And the person, they joined in 58. If somebody joined 30 years before that, joined in 38, before the start of the Second World War.
It is, that does sit you up, doesn't it, when you say it? And the passing of 30 years, our respective careers and our colleagues out there hopefully listening to this, 30 years gone in a blink of an eye. And yet, as you say, 30 years prior to me joining, 58, the Second World War had only been over 13 years. And again, when you think about it, that's quite mind-blowing, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. I can think of old boys now who said exactly that. We've had the best days. Oh, yeah. I think you and I can say we've had the best days, and I'm sure people in the job currently will say the same.
But perhaps. I think we did. I genuinely believe that we did. And the reason I say that is because when my dad was in the job, a milkman would earn more than a police officer.
Yes.
We're now getting back to that time. We're now getting to the time where, new recruits joining up, they're on something like £22,000-23,000 a year. How on earth are they going to survive? And then there'll be questions in the house because a police officer has tried to, we call it mumping, don't we, where they've tried to work a deal out for a portion of chips, or they can't afford to travel to work because of all these police stations that are being closed down. Where are they supposed to work? You've got major crime teams working out of Dunmow. You're not going to get any officers that are going to travel from Clacton to Dunmow. And I really believe we did have the halcyon days.
Yeah, yeah.
But it won't go back, mate. That's the thing.
I think we've crossed the Rubicon, the point of no return, and nothing will go back. I agree. Sadly, in many cases, I guess there are elements of the job these days that are improvements. I don't know.
I think the IT element is good in some ways and negative in the others, because what it actually does, it keeps people off the street.
Yes. Yeah.
It's no good giving them an iPad or a portal or something like that they can work from in a car, because it just means that people have got their heads down continually working on a pad instead of looking up to see what car's been stolen. And as I say, I don't envy them the new role. And of course, you've got family that are still in the police.
That's right. Yeah, our youngest daughter is in the City of London Police, and I live the job through her now. And I must say, everything about the City of London Police that I hear is very, very positive indeed. Her colleagues, friends, they are marvellous. Really are. They really, truly do look out for each other. Very close-knit. Very professional. Their uniform is very professional, and everything about them. And I just love to hear stories and anecdotes about what's going on these days and how things are dealt with. Yeah, fascinating.
And I have to say, the family effects of the City of London Police, and this was reported this week, they've got a real concern about the welfare side, and they've got a great federation team there with Mike Reed and the other people there. But they've set up a food bank.
Have they really?
Yeah. They've set up a food bank because officers are having to travel. And then, because what happens, you've got Sadiq Khan is going to introduce the new ULEZ, which means that officers that work on nights or lates and they can't get home any other way, they have to drive their car into the new ULEZ area, which is going to cost them £12.50 a day, which is coming out of their... It makes my blood boil, Simon, if I'm really honest with you. But so we're now on CID at Colchester. What was the lowest point of being on uniform? How was that for you? I don't mean working Christmas Eve or Christmas night.
No, we all sort of took that in our stride. I think the lowest point. I don't know really. I honestly can't think now, and that's just leaping ahead to when I retired. There were things in 30 years, some pretty awful things that happened to me personally. Some low points when I felt really bad, really awful, in fact. But the point that I want to make at this point is when I retired, it was like magic. A switch went and all of those bad things were pushed to the back of my mind. And all I had, indeed all I have now, are really good memories, happy memories, very fond memories, great colleagues, incidents that we went to and so on. So really, in truth, going back during my uniform days, I honestly can't think of anything that I would describe as a low point. It was all very positive.
So what was the inspiration to go on CID? I mean, we were both on the same CID courses and we had a laugh on there. We might touch on some of that later on.
Indeed, we did.
But what was the inspiration to go on to CID?
I think the job itself presents so many opportunities. I would have liked to have been a dog handler without question. I would have loved to have gone on firearms. But you can't do everything. And being a detective was something that really fascinated me. Your task to sort of do what you can to investigate, take statements, find evidence to either implicate or indeed eliminate somebody. That was the role, and I feel very strongly about that. Our role, the police role, is to find the truth, and that may mean that you have got the wrong man. Not very often, I don't think, but equally sometimes you have to be alive to the fact, this piece of evidence actually corroborates his version of events. It does happen. Fights, for example, where you've got 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So I think it's important. But it was that task of investigating which really fascinated me. And I thought, I'm going to go for that.
And it opens another chapter, doesn't it? Because you actually you start to understand the access that you have to the experts.
Yes.
And that really does. And what you did do when we were young detectives, you worked off the experience of the older detectives who've been there and done it. And they've seen no two jobs are the same. Everything's got a different side to it. But you needed your stalwarts in the CID office to guide you at times. Hopefully you'd get the right. Sometimes you had some grumpy old sods, But that's what that's what makes a difference around the CID.
It does, and I found it fascinating. Again, I know I use that word a lot, but I genuinely did. When you go up to the CID office, both in the old Nick and in the new police station, and there was a fog that you couldn't see from what, and it wasn't, you just couldn't see. And it was, in truth, could be a bit daunting because some people, and in fairness, each and every one of those people, and there weren't many, but there were one or two that were a bit grumpy.
Yeah.
But their bark was worse than their bite.
Absolutely.
But they were always very helpful,
Yeah.
I found. And although they'd give you the old wooden top line and so on, more tongue-in-cheek, I think, than seriousness. But then, they'd give you advice. They'd help you sometimes. Some great people, some people who I aspired to, others who I didn't. But some people left a really good impression on me.
Yeah,
and some really great people.
And you worked on some interesting jobs. But I remember, I think it was Graham Garnham. He had a burglary and he was a dog handler. And I know you took that really personally and you identified who was responsible and they got locked up. But the atmosphere in a CID office was a club. I mean, whatever way whether we liked it or not.
Yeah.
And it was a club that worked.
Indeed it did. Yeah, most definitely. And it was a team game, and that's something that's very dear to me. I think the police is a team game without question, and calling it a game, I'm not underestimating it. It's a very serious job to do, and what you're dealing with is very serious, and it is certainly to the victims, but it was... You couldn't achieve anything without you being part of a team and people playing their role, pulling together and not being frightened to pipe up and say, well, I think I've got a better idea or whatever, but having the courage, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think if you're one person in amongst people, certainly if you've got a serious investigation and you've got the detective superintendent, there's SIO, other higher ranking officers in there, and you're a lonely DC or DS or whatever, and actually putting your hand up and say, excuse me, sir, I think that's courageous, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not always easy, but I respect those that do.
But most senior investigating officers will say there's no such thing as a bad idea. Whilst you might sit there, and I think that's around the people sitting around you, you think, I don't want to look a bit of a wally in front of them as much as anything else. But the fact is, if you've got an idea, you share it. And like you say, we had some great leaders, and they were proper leaders. I liked the sociability side of it. I didn't agree with everything that went on, but I did like the sociability side and the fog. We had one old boy who'd sit there and smoke his pipe, despite the fact that I'd soak his tobacco in whatever I could. We had another one who, one of the DIs would come in and nick your sandwiches. So Ian Bauer decided that he was going to fill his sandwiches up with cat food. So the DI came in, took a bite out of his sandwich, and he's having a bite of cat. But that was a laugh. What sort of stuff did you investigate on CID at Colchester?
Well, when I first went on 92, it predated MIT's, the Major Investigation Team. Yeah. So any incident in your area would fall to CID. So murders, rapes, serious assaults, burglaries, dwelling burglaries, arson, that sort of thing. So just about anything really, Paul.
But don't you think that, now there's a massive swathe trying to get people to go to burglaries because it's the most invasive crime that a normal person will contend with, day to day. If you sat in a room, everyone will know someone has been done for speeding if they haven't been done for speeding themselves.
Yeah.
Everyone will know someone has been the victim of burglary. People won't know who's been the victim of sexual assault because it's not something that's spoken about.
No.
And the same goes with murder. So it's that end of the market that's quite busy, isn't it? It is actually, if you've been the victim of a dwelling burglary, it's so invasive. Somebody going through your house, through your personal belongings and stealing things that are irreplaceable.
Yes.
That watch that your father left you, the ring that your grandmother left you, all those types of things that go. And I think it's an injustice to the victims now that the police don't attend every burglary. I I can't believe that we're even discussing the fact that we got to a point where. But what are your views around that?
Well, I wholeheartedly agree. I think any sane person, let alone police officer serving or otherwise, it's a violation, isn't it, of your home, of your space, of your, an Englishman's home is his castle. And that's a very true saying as far as I'm concerned. And to, rifle through your belongings, and the thought that there's this uninvited guest, to say the least, it has broken in. And coincidentally, I heard yesterday, I watched something on YouTube, and there was a retired assistant commissioner from the Met, Helen King, and she was talking on Sky News, I believe, with Sophie Ridge. The statistic that she gave, I found startling. 80% of incidents that officers attend now do not relate to a crime. 80%. And even Sophie Ridge, she not queried it, but she said, "My goodness, that's a huge percentage, isn't it? 80%, because the police are required to do all sorts of other things now." Whilst they're dealing with 80% of matters that are not crimes, then amongst that are your burglary victims.
But they've become professional social workers, haven't they? They are now the people that have always done safeguarding. Of course they have, and you only have to look at the way that life has developed. When we were kids, you had mental health units where people were insecure mental health units. What do? They close them down. They move them all out to Clacton, for instance.
Yes.
Somebody has to look after these people and give them the appropriate support, and it always falls to the police.
Yes.
Wrongly.
Yes.
The problem you've got is that the police have gone from a 365-day 24-hour, 365 days a year, 24-hour service, and they've gone down to a 9 to 5. So they're making themselves less accessible. So there's a conflict between them and the other authorities. And I as I say, I do feel for the modern police.
Yes.
When you look back at those halcyon days, what jobs actually stick out in your mind?
Well, one, and I was talking to a friend about this the other day, it's not on the face of it, it's not the most serious, but when I explain briefly, people I'm sure will understand it was despicable. And I had two lads in for some dwelling burglaries, and then I think they'd guessed that they were each sort of implicating each other. And during the course of the interviews, one told me that the other was responsible for stealing some toys off two children's grave. Now, these two little tiny children they died in a house fire in Wimpole Road in Colchester. I beg your pardon, Brook Street in Colchester. And naturally, that was a horrendous thing to happen. Heart-wrenching indeed. And so these poor little children perished in a house fire. They were buried up at Colchester Crematorium.
Yeah. And
one of the lads I had apparently was responsible for stealing these toys. And I, even now thinking about it, as I say, people will understand, I'm sure, in the grand scheme of things, not the most serious thing per se, but what a despicable thing to do. It was up there, isn't it? And I was absolutely determined. Anyway, long story short, I interviewed him, and eventually he admitted it. And that gave me huge satisfaction just to know that I'd interviewed him and he'd admitted doing that. The sad thing was, as you'd expect, on the front of the Evening Gazette, the Colchester Gazette, there was a great big spread about the fire and these two poor little children. But I was glad to give the press a briefing that this lad had admitted it, and there was a postage stamp size piece in the Gazette the next day. I guess that's to be expected. But I was, if I'm frank with you, I was a bit disappointed. I thought it perhaps would attract more, but that was satisfying. Yeah,
that is heart-wrenching, isn't it?
It is. That was an awful thing.
We alluded it to earlier on, but you and I, we did our 2 CID courses together, didn't we?
Yes.
We went to Birmingham for 10 weeks, and that was I put on more weight there than I've ever done in my life. I came back a lot poorer. And I found that Guinness was my drink of choice. And it didn't matter what time we turned up at Tally Ho. There was always somebody partying, wasn't there? I mean, that was hard because we had young families, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
So we were travelling from Essex to Birmingham. But I have got some great memories of that. And but obviously the one that we did our CID selection course together. I mean, you can tell the story in whatever way you want to tell it, Simon. But it's funny now, but it wasn't funny at the time, was it?
It was extremely unfunny at the time, and in essence, the 3-week course. Was it 3 weeks?
Yeah,
I think it was 3
yeah.
weeks at headquarters. Great bunch, and it was pretty innocuous, to be honest with you. Very enjoyable. Learnt an awful lot. We were young and keen, as we ought to have been. And then on the last night, so the Thursday evening of the 3rd week, we all went out to the Fox and Raven, I believe, and you sought permission to get some beers and take them back, which we did. And then events overtook and ended up with one of the chaps who was an older bloke on our CID course doing all sorts of things he ought not to have done, involving a snooker ball and a bottle of lemonade.
Yeah.
And, that affected somebody who was on a sergeant's course who, as far as I'm aware, was looking at a really distinguished career ahead of him. He'd been sort of headhunted, I believe, for bigger and better things. Alas, not to be, because the long and the short of it was, inevitably, it came to the attention of senior officers, thorough investigation, and they both got sacked.
Yeah, they did.
And I can recall being the first witness. Fortunately, none of us gave evidence because both the chaps involved pleaded guilty. But I can recall when they came in and said, right, PC Willett, you're the first to give evidence. Yeah. Consequently, sitting in the room and the creaky door, every time that door creaked open, I anticipated they're going to call me name to give evidence.
In the Chief Constable's waiting room.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the Chief Inspector then, with these marvellous uniforms on, I alluded to earlier on, really smart, shiny shoes, really formal, as indeed it should be. Lunchtime came and that Chief Inspector said, you can all stand down because they've pleaded. But I recall, Paul, not long after that, an hour or so after that, we were informed that they'd both been sacked.
Yeah.
And it's a strong word, but I can recall, although I think we all knew that was certainly on the cards, but I can recall that being a really big shock. Police officers being sacked. Yeah. It is a big thing.
Yes,
we hear it every day now, unfortunately, but... and it was the right thing. Of course, they should have been sacked, but my goodness me, to hear that in the context of being in the Chief Constable's building and with senior officers flying around, terrifying actually. Yeah,
and I always remember the Terry Gardner and Janet Adcock sitting in the office at Whittam, and I get called up and they said, compliments of Mr. Markham. Here's your options. You give a statement or we're going to suspend you. There was no niceties about it. And I also have vivid memories of the night after the event, and I've got to take an element of blame here because I took 10 quid off everybody and went and got booze. And we sat in there, and it was the downfall of a number of people's careers as a direct result of that party, but that's the way it is.
Well, it is the way it is, and I know what you mean, and that's why I said a minute ago that it was terrifying, because I thought I'd done absolutely nothing wrong, as most of us had not. We simply were there.
Yeah,
we were present.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this happened in seconds. It sounds awful when you go through the grim details, which I don't intend to do, but in reality, it took seconds. However, we're all responsible for our actions, aren't
absolutely.
we? And you and I didn't do it. In fact, the vast majority, other than two people, all behave themselves, and that's how it is. We should be accountable for what
absolutely.
we do. And although there was a bit of sympathy for them at their fate, in other words, being sacked, their pensions, their wages, and so on, their reputations, which is important to people, it is to me. So that went as a consequence of a few minutes or a few seconds
of stupidity,
ridiculous behaviour.
Yeah, and it was, you're absolutely right. But I mean, they even got to a point where they had scenes of crime, fingerprinting the snooker balls, and I mean, it was a bizarre sort of feeling to be part and parcel of that.
It was.
We did our 10 weeks at Birmingham, and as I say, it was a blast. But as a young parent with young children, that was quite hard because Birmingham's not just but I wouldn't swap it for all the tea in China, because it was one of life's experiences. And I suppose our wives got on with being single parents for 10 weeks. We were on the last CID course that lasted for 10 weeks.
We were the last 10-weeker, and it was a great course. In fact, our son was born whilst we were there. We were there October to December, weren't we? And our son, our middle child, was born whilst we were there. So my wife truly was a single parent, exactly. So he was our second child, and my wife, bless her, just cracked on remarkably, really.
And because it's all moved in-house and there's no residential courses now and so on and so forth. So that element has changed. And we ate well, we drank well, we had it was an absolute hoot. So after we've done our CID courses, you've come back, I've come back. You're on CID at Colchester. Where do you go to from there, Simon? I
was promoted then in April 94. I got my ticket, but I waited a year. And then I was posted back on uniform to Brentwood. Again, I was very fortunate. I went to a great shift, great people. And
great place to work as well.
Great place to work. I thought so. Really good. The Met just next door, the other side of the M25. So consequently, our paths crossed quite a bit. There were often Met officers at Brentwood. Met some really great people as a consequence of that. So, it was really good.
What I liked about Brentwood was that it was they wanted their police service there. They were very supportive. Forget all the Towie stuff and everything else. Very, very supportive. The local council, and I know they're still very supportive. But what a great shame that police station has gone. It's been knocked down. It's now residential premises. The sale of those police stations was to pay for a new police headquarters.
Was it?
Yeah, and what happened to that? Every police station I've worked in, within the subdivisional stations, they've all closed, Braintree being the exception. And, it's a great shame. But you saw some interesting people whilst you were in Brentwood. You bumped into some very interesting people.
Yes, I mean, there are plenty of celebrities there. I saw Fatima Whitbread. She, at the time, lived in the house called Javel Inn. Whether she still lives there. Graham Gooch, I believe. Ross Kemp, used to see him all the time. And the best thing, and I admit to being a bit starstruck, was dear old Frank Bruno.
Yeah.
I think, we all loved and continue to love Frank, and especially now we know that his mental health has suffered a lot over the years, bless him, and a great man, very well loved chap, and a fantastic boxer. But I saw Frank, and I was out in Stondon Massey where he lived at the time in a little Panda car, I believe, and anyway, he came the other way, FRB1. And I saw him and I turned round and he stopped in the petrol station and I had to call in.
Oh, good for you.
And he put his hand up, "Hello, officer." And I said, "Hello, Frank." And my heart was I know that sounds a bit silly, but what a great man and a fantastic boxer, great athlete.
Yeah.
And
a sporting ambassador.
Oh, indeed. What a great chap. Yeah, lovely man. I wish him well. Good man.
He had the Hearns living out there. And
really?
Oh, yeah. It was. I mean, I remember getting the train from there one day, and Steve Davis is on the train.
Oh,
yes. It was a great place to work, and you never knew you were going to get a phone call from. I'm not going to name the individual, but there was a robbery in Brentwood, and the CEO, so the officer arrests the first person that they see that fits the description of the suspect. He gets taken into custody. The next thing, a phone call comes into the office, and it's a senior, a well-known TV personality who I will not name. And he said, I need to speak to whoever's in charge. And I said, well, the chief inspector's upstairs. So I phoned the chief inspector. You need to speak to this man. He phones up. He says, you have arrested my chief financial officer, who fitted this description of this robber from a bookmaker's.
Good grief.
And he basically said, look, you come and do my job and I'll come and do yours, because you clearly can't do yours, or your officer can't do. And we brushed this person down and sent them off into the sunset. And I'll tell you about who it was off air. But yeah, I mean, we did. We had some great people, and there were, there's a few quid around Brentwood as well.
There is, yeah. It's a very opulent area. Hutton Mount. I've been to burglaries there and incidents there, and I recall a lounge there. It was as long as your garden here, Paul. I mean, it was enormous.
Yeah.
I mean, very impressive. Very, very impressive indeed. Yes, certainly there's some money there, that's for sure.
A lot of footballers and whatever. You'd often see the lovely Sir Trevor Brooking driving through the town. And, it is a great place to work.
Yeah.
So how long were you there?
I was there a year.
Okay.
I was there a year, and then I went on major investigation, Op Apache, and then whilst I was on that for about a year, and then an advert came out for a DS on the Child Abuse Investigation Unit, and so I put in for that and was successful, and I went to Colchester then.
And Apache was to do with the corruption following the murders of the Rettendon boys. That was
that's it. That investigation,
which is interesting, because I was on the other side. Not that I was corrupt, but I was and we were mates, so that made But I didn't know what you were doing, and that was who knew that what those scoundrels were doing in the back office.
Well, that's the thing, and I think as we get older, I'm lucky. I'll be 58 the end of next month, hopefully. But as we get older, we acquire wisdom, and one of those things is to keep an open mind. And
absolutely.
When you see people come in, and I experienced it, and I was big enough and ugly enough to sort of take it on the chin, so to speak. But lips curled. People turn their noses up at us, but we were doing a job. We were selected or applied in some cases, perhaps, but we were doing a job. So what I'm saying is, you see somebody and it's easy to turn your nose up at them, but they're just doing a job like we did in our everyday job. And you see some members of the public, but you think we're just doing what we're paid to do to get to the truth, as I mentioned earlier on, and that was what it was about.
And to put it into context, what we had a man called Darren Nicholls, who was a police informant who drove two people to a murder site where three people were killed in a Range Rover. That's not that's not to be ignored. And then it's identified that the police handlers are allegedly involved in forms of corruption. So it has to be investigated, because the police are not above reproach. They need to be investigated and dealt with properly, and that's exactly what you guys did. And a lot of my friends worked on that inquiry. Little did I know, because they were very discreet around the way that they carried out their business. So you then went on to child abuse investigations.
Child abuse investigations, which several people had said that's an interesting job, a tough job, like most things are in the police. And and I remained there for 16 years, both at Colchester and at Chelmsford. I worked with some fantastic people there, some really outstanding people, detectives, social workers as well.
Yeah.
We worked multi-agency, social workers, health visitors, and various other people, paediatricians, great people that, really got stuck in and played their part in the multi-agency approach into these investigations, yeah.
And years ago, it was called was it Community Services Branch?
It was years and years ago.
Which was completely different to what it's transpired to now, because it's absolutely, it's vital that children are protected from predators. And the work of the child protection team, child abuse investigations, whatever they're called, is so, so important, because it's those formative years where those children need the support and the offenders need to be locked up. But how did that affect you mentally? Because you're dealing with some very, very unpleasant individuals.
Yeah, I mean, people have asked me that over the years, Paul, and said, how do you deal with it? And it's a very poor answer, frankly. I just could. I don't know how, but I just couldn't. I think it's one of those things, either you can or you can't. Yeah. And I think if you can't, perhaps it's best not to pursue it any further and admit defeat. And there's no shame in that whatsoever. But I was able to, despite having a young family myself at the time when I first went on there in 97. And yeah, you do. And again, sometimes it's not the most serious incidents. I remember a dear little girl, for example, Holland-on-Sea. She was in foster care as she'd been smacked by one of her parents, her mother, I believe, and she was the most delightful little girl, and she had a perfect handprint on her face. Now, again, of course it's serious, but in the grand scheme of things, there are more serious injuries. But that dear little girl, that one that I thought, crikey, I felt really bad. She was bright and bubbly and polite and lovely. So, but of course there are other things far, far more serious.
And going back on that, I think that sometimes as a parent, and I'm not saying that it's right, but you can see why parents actually do break, because we're not living their lives. We're worrying about our own mortgages being paid. We're worried about our own food being put on the table.
Yeah.
We're not there when a parent does smack their child. And I'm not an advocate of smacking per se, but, it's a very difficult subject. But your predatory sex offenders, those that have sexually abused victims, they really do need locking up, and locking up for an awful long time.
They do. You're right. Just to illustrate what you said, I went to a job in Colchester, and there was an allegation that a young lad, I don't know, 8, 9, I think, that he had a cigarette burn. And in my experience, 16 years on that department, cigarette burns, mercifully, were very rare.
Yeah.
And anyway, I went to this house, and this little lad had a bit of a scuff mark on his arm. And his dad was there, and I was conscious that his dad was watching me as I watched this lad that had ADHD.
Right.
And he was like the Wall of Death rider. He was running round the house or round the front room like something possessed. This little lad had so much energy. And the dad was smoking a cigarette, and before my very eyes, the lad jumped over the sofa, down, and brushed his dad's cigarette. And I saw exactly, it was never a deliberate cigarette burn. That's the short version of that story. And this chap looked at me, and I could read his mind. And I think what he was saying in his mind was, how on earth would you cope with this little lad? No. And I, for what it's worth, he had my utmost sympathy, because he was a handful. Lovely little lad, but my goodness me, the ADHD meant that he was running like
and like I say, we don't live these people's lives. But when you have the opportunity to witness it firsthand, because everything's gone online, I think some of those things are lost. But it's right that teachers, medical practitioners, the police service, everybody reports these matters in.
Yeah.
Because the next thing you know, there's going to be an incident, and I've got a really dear friend who was concerned about their next door neighbour, and said that they thought one of the children was being physically abused, not sexually, but beaten. What do we do? And I said, you've got to report it. And they said, but if I report it, then, and I'm wrong, then the fact is that I've interfered. And I said, yeah, but if you're not wrong, if in 6 months' time that child ends up in a mortuary and a post-mortem's being carried out because it's been abused by its father, how would you feel then? And they said, no, you're right. So they used Crime Stoppers, which is a fantastic organisation, should be used more often.
Yes.
Because you can report everything anonymously. And that's what they did. And they got a visit, and social, we know that social care went round there and did their stuff. So if that's prevented that child from being the victim of crime, then that's absolutely brilliant.
Well, it is, and to endorse that, I recall I mentioned earlier on before we started here that the training, multi-agency training, which I used to enjoy very much. But one of the things then, bearing in mind this was a long time ago, was Jamie Bolger.
Yes.
And those poor people who had seen Jamie go, and they were suspicious. Obviously, they didn't know what was going to befall that poor little boy, but those people, it haunts them, I'm sure, until this day. So the message there was, don't do nothing, do something. It's not always easy. I fully appreciate that for the reasons you've mentioned. But, don't sit and let things happen.
And nobody's going to be offended. Jamie Bolger was abducted by two boys, taken and murdered. In fact, I think we were in Birmingham at that time.
You're right, we were.
And that was a hot topic. But you're talking 30 years ago now, mate.
That's right.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that if you've got that public service in your body, you're not frightened to stand up and say that's wrong, and if you're doing the right thing. But there's a lot of people that won't do that because they don't want to interfere, but they have to interfere.
Yeah.
They have to say something. Even if it's anonymously, they have to say something.
Yeah.
What motivated you to move away from the child protection element?
After 16 years, it wasn't necessarily the nature of the work, but internal wranglings. I mean, it was just the way some things were going, and I thought I really need a change in direction.
Yeah.
And I remember I was scrolling through the pinks, as we knew them, the personnel bulletins, which contained, amongst other things, job advertisements. And when I looked, I saw Detective Chief Inspector Special Branch, and I thought, if only there was a DS's job. Scrolled a little further, DI. If only there was a DS, and lo and behold, beneath that, Detective Sergeant, Special Branch, Stansted Airport.
Brilliant.
And I applied, and the rest is history. So my last 5.5 years, I was successful in that interview. And my last 5.5 years service, I spent as a DS on Team 2 at Stansted Airport. And it was the most fantastic job. It was incredible. And I've said it throughout, but I really was so fortunate. The team that I inherited were the business. Each and every one. They were so loyal, hardworking, used their initiative. I could go on all day. Nothing but praise for all.
But that makes your job a lot easier when they're like that. It
made my job so much easier.
So everybody knows what child abuse investigation do, but what does Special Branch? I mean, there's a lot of police officers won't know what Special Branch actually do. No,
that's right. I mean, in essence, it is an intelligence role, multi-agency again, like so many other roles in the police. We used to work with other police forces, a lot with SO15, the Met's Counter-Terrorism Command, MI5, MI6, the military. And, in short, it was all about gathering intelligence and, a fascinating job. And some of the people that you work with and their backgrounds, as much as they enlighten you or are able to enlighten you, just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and they are proper James Bond, some of them, aren't they?
Indeed they are.
I think people don't realise that the amount of data that is collected through travel.
Yes.
Through, and years ago it was the Irish flights coming in and out of Ireland. Braintree is well known for being an Irish enclave, if you like. If people got off the plane, there was lots of engineering companies, civil engineering companies that come and work here. And there was a lot of monitoring, which they, that was a posh way of saying they were keeping an eye on people so they could see how many times, because technology's moved into the travel space. So it's easier to monitor people. But you never see the end of the job, do you?
No, that's right. And it's an old cliche now, but it is genuinely a need-to-know job. Exactly. Yeah. And you wouldn't ever dream of asking, what happened to that chap or those people or whatever, because but I always found it very rewarding that you knew in some way that you and the team had contributed to their end game.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You just provide them with whatever you can provide them with and let it. But often, because I found them, generally speaking, them being MI5, that they were quintessentially English.
Yeah.
Very, very. And when you received correspondence from them, you know, it would be, I wonder whether you would mind or whether you would consider exercising. Very polite and great people. But often, because they're very polite, you would receive an update to say, what you did on Monday morning was extremely useful. Thanks very much. Words to that effect. So, you know, whilst it wasn't detailed, and I never expected it would be, it's nice, it's courteous, and you know that what you've done is appreciated and indeed useful to them. So that was good.
And I think that a lot of things are lost around the fact that we have our homegrown suspects. Mm. They don't all come from the Far East, Middle East, you know, from Chechnya, wherever it may be. We've got people that live in this country that are subversives and would like to undermine the government, and they're the same people that will be going to Torremolinos so it's a really, really vital and important role. And as a dear friend of ours once said, you don't see the Russians rolling up through Brightonsea High Street, do you?
No.
He caveats with that. I've done my job. You never see the Russians rolling up Brightonsea High Street. But no, that's fascinating. When you retired, how did you feel?
I felt, I guess, some relief because the pressure of the job, not just for me, for everybody, is a tough job. I think people underestimate that, the pressures that are on you, not just physical pressure, dealing with a great big muscly chap, but time scales and pressure that you might have done something wrong, not intentionally, but that your mistake might cost something at court. You know, there is pressure an awful lot. I think life in general these days is very pressurised. Right. I mean, little children, for example, as I understand it, have homework when they're about 5 or 6. And, you know, so pressure is poured on us from an early age, or poured on those youngsters from an early age. But immensely grateful that I've been able to do it. Again, I hope that doesn't sound twee or anything, but it was a great thing. And I look back now, I could talk all day and every day about the things that I was able to do in the job, the people I've met, colleagues, some criminals.
Fascinating.
They are fascinating people. I mean, I think that's evidenced by you go into any library, and I'm an avid reader, but you go into any library now and see the true crime section. That's enough to let you know that people, generally the public, are fascinated by crime and criminals, and there are some fascinating stories to be told and to be listened to.
Yeah, and that's what this is part of what we do and why we do it, because people are interested in people and they're interested in what we did.
Yeah.
When you walked out of that door, I mean, for me, I was sad.
Yeah.
Because I gave back that warrant card. There was elation because I was getting my pension. You know, that was but immense pride about what we did. But you don't take away those, you can't walk away without having those memories. The goods far outweigh the bad.
Yeah.
What was the most horrendous job that you worked on, other than, like the police corruption element? What was the most horrendous job that you had to work on?
I think anything over the years where there's death, because death affects people, obviously. But where, sudden deaths, the death of a child, whether it be a murder of a child, or whether the last few years on the child abuse team, the government had introduced the child death review, which meant that the police, and principally the DS in an office, would attend deaths of a child being somebody under the age of 18. So even non-suspicious deaths. And generally speaking, the DS would go out to the scene with a consultant paediatrician.
Yeah.
So you'd face these people, these bereaved parents, and I can hear one in particular where I could hear as I and the paediatrician walked up the pathway on New Year's Eve, and I can hear that poor mum screaming now, wailing.
Yeah.
Because their 2-year-old daughter had died earlier that day, and horrendous really. And another one in Dovercourt, and a little boy died in a house fire. His mum had met with a friend of hers who'd just come out of prison and left this little boy home alone. She'd nipped across the road and he'd played with matches. The house went up and he died. And he was exactly the same age as our son was at the time. So that was a particularly poignant one. But I went on to interview the mother, who was a tough lady, well known to the police, tattooed, really tough lady. But I interviewed her for, I think, 3.5, 4 hours at Harwich Police Station. And even now, it's sort of quite moving, bearing in mind her predicament. And she was interviewed in relation to an allegation of neglect of a child, leaving him at home alone. Yeah. And the last question, as with all interviews, is there anything you would like to say? And she said, yes, thank you for treating me like a human being. And I found that, I even now, that was 98. So even now, that was a magnanimous thing for her to say to me.
Yeah.
And
but that's the nice person you, mate, because you didn't judge her for what.
No. Cheers,
as hard
Paul.
as it is, you didn't judge her for the person that she was at that, because she's lived that life of regret now.
Indeed. And so that your listeners know, this Crown Prosecution Service decided to take no further action on the basis that it wasn't in the public interest. As you quite rightly say, in my view, what other punishment would fit where she's allowed her son to die in the most horrendous circumstances. So, yeah, but it was, well, I'm talking about it now, and I thought that was rather, huge of her to say that.
But it just shows, and if we don't get anything else out to people, whatever people may think of the police service, we are human. We're fathers, we're grandfathers. We've got that human element, and I think that some of that is the portrayal of the police service, the way that it's dragged through the gutter by some quarters is unforgivable, because actually every day these guys and girls are out there fighting the good fight. Yes, there are different standards. I get all that, but they're still doing the same job with the same peeling principles.
Yeah,
and I really feel for them. So we've retired now, Si. You and I, we're living the golden age. What are we doing now, mate?
Well, I've done 3 or 4 different things since I retired 4.5 years ago. 2, courtesy of your good self and Joe. One was working in Chelmsford as an ambassador, which was enjoyable.
And you were a good ambassador, mate.
Year. Oh, bless you. I enjoyed that work with some great people. Again, most were retired police officers. So it was, when you were walking around Chelmsford, you could spin a few yarns with newly acquired colleagues, great people.
And they're still friends, aren't they?
They are still friends, and we keep in touch one way or another.
It's just like being back in the police, actually.
It was, that's right. And then more recently, I worked at Saunders Auction House, which was
and they
great
loved you.
place. Well, I loved them. That's
they
nice.
Loved you.
Well, bless you. That was a really great job. It was fascinating. There were really nice people there. There was, just a really classy bunch of people. The staff there, directors, and also the customers that bought stuff at auction. They'd come, and I really enjoyed meeting so many people over the months I worked there. But alas, it was just a bit too far, really, so it wasn't economically viable. But that is a great shame, because it was a lovely job, very, very enjoyable indeed.
And your greatest love?
Well, I like the countryside. I'm a country boy.
Countryside.
I'm a country boy, always have been. And I like wildlife. I like my dogs. I enjoy a bit of shooting and fishing, and always have. Yeah. So that's it. So I was lucky when I retired to combine that with some work at Braxted Park, a great estate really close to me. And, that was nice. And I still go there now. I don't work there anymore, but I still go there and take my dogs out 3 times.
So how did you get into, I mean, you are the quintessential English, you are, Simon. I mean, you turned up here today in your brogues, and, you are the part. How did you get into your shooting?
I think my dad, he didn't do a lot of shooting, but he's very great man with animals. He worked on a farm when he was a young lad, very good with animals. Animals come first, and rightly so. You know, his dogs that he had, he used to run German Shepherds in trials,
Right.
and the dogs came first. You know, they were fed, and you know, he looked after them. I don't mean by implication that we were neglected in any way. Far from it. Our parents are great people and were fantastic parents, but you know, he looked after animals, cattle, pigs and so on, but they were looked after, and their appearance was impeccable. They were fed and watered. They really were looked after very well, and that left a lasting impression on me. Alas, that's not the case all the time.
No.
But so he was an influence on me, and I went to woodwork club at school, and I'd always thought that forgiveness is easier to obtain than permission.
Yeah.
So I made a ferret hutch at woodwork club, and then I took it home and got a ferret, and they said, "What on earth is that?" And I said, "Well, that's me ferret," but it was beyond the point of no return. So I used to like ferrets when I was a lad at school. And
do you still keep them now?
I do, yeah. Do a bit of rabbiting, and
but you're ethical around it, aren't you?
Absolutely. It's very, very important to me that, you know, these country pursuits, as some people call it, I do acknowledge and always have that others have very strong views to the contrary, which I respect, by the way. Indeed, I have some sympathy with certain elements. So those who indulge and participate in country sports, country pursuits, must do it ethically. The RSPB recently said that some gamekeepers do shoot and kill birds of prey.
Yeah.
Well, you know, they've thrown the gauntlet down, and some have reacted angrily. Whether that's right or not, I don't know, but some people only have to look at themselves and examine their own consciences to see whether that's true.
Yeah.
There are gamekeepers who certainly do not do that, who are ethical,
yeah, absolutely,
who are professional, who fly the flag. And when you see them at country fairs, the National Gamekeepers Organisation, for example, of which I'm a member, you know, they do look the part, and they are very professional. But same as in the police, we had some colleagues who were the antithesis of that, and it's the same in the countryside. There are people who don't follow the rule book.
No.
And those people, my personal view is I don't associate them with them whatsoever.
No, I absolutely agree. And I mean, we're at a point, bear in mind we live in the country, and you get vermin and all sorts. We don't put any poisons down, nothing, because at the end of the day, I don't want to see the barn owl that I've got flying around here dead because it's ingested something that's got poison in it. And that's, you know, that's how we are. It's living in harmony, isn't it, around it?
It is.
You work your dogs. You've got 7?
Yeah, I've got Labradors, a little Lurcher and a little Jack Russell. But yeah, they go out. The Labradors 2-3 times a week, which they're born to do. So we pick up on shoots, which involves working your dogs as gun dogs. They're trained gun dogs. So picking up any wounded game or dead game behind the team of guns.
Yeah.
And that all goes into the food chain. Again, I acknowledge that some people don't like that, and I respect that. But I enjoy that because some of the birds inevitably are wounded, but your dogs find them. And you can put them out of their misery. And so, yeah.
And I think a lot of it's lost. That and I know around here where birds are put down, if the farmers weren't investing in stock, and I'm not saying, I mean, I've seen it on some shoots where they've pulled out the tail feathers so the birds can't get off the ground, so that the lesser shot has half a chance of fulfilling their day. But if you didn't have farmers putting the poults down, then I'm not sure we'd have the same number of pheasants or partridges running around and doing their stuff. And there's got to be a balance. I get the ache where they just shoot everything, you know, the rooks, they shoot the rooks and the squirrels, and they shoot the foxes and the rabbits. Well, let the foxes do their work and everything else falls into place. I'm not talking about people that have got their own birds. I'm talking about a particular area that I know will remain nameless where they haven't got chickens, or they haven't got anything that's going to get destroyed. They just go out of their way to effectively kill everything. And it's beautiful to see. We get them here. We see the deer running around the field behind us.
Yeah.
We've got the hawks that come down and land on the. It's beautiful. But I know that you are a conservationist as much as anything else.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there is a strong argument, I would say, and I'm very happy to identify with it, when shoots do what they do ethically. And they could be examined, they could be put under a microscope. Yeah. They produce food and it's a harvest. And they manage, and that's the word, they manage the countryside. And there's a balance.
Yeah,
there's a
balance.
And I'm very happy to be identified with that. But the others that sort of transgress from what's acceptable and what's lawful, then I'm afraid I don't.
No, I haven't got any time for them.
No.
And you also do corporate shoots, don't you? You teach people to shoot.
Yeah, I help over at the Fens Shooting School, which I enjoy very much. I go over there a few times.
Couldn't teach me though, could you? Mate? I couldn't hit a cow's backside with a banjo.
You did all right. No. But no, that's enjoyable, and I think I like to impart any experience that I have, whether that's training, as I did on the child abuse team, and imparting a little bit of what I know, which is not a great deal, but hopefully helping others. And certainly with fishing, fly fishing, shooting, and trying to get somebody who's never held a gun before to smash a clay. And when they do, the look on their face is priceless. So I really do enjoy that.
Yeah,
and I've met lots of very, very nice people as a consequence. So yeah, that's very enjoyable.
And if people wanted private instruction, I mean, do you do that as well?
I could do that. Yeah, I could. I'd be happy
we'll
to
set you up on our services site, mate, and
Thank
get you out there.
very much. Lovely job. Cheers.
You are very, you're a family man, and you're absolutely passionate about everything that you do. And I'm really grateful for your time today, Simon.
It's a pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, Paul.
Yeah, see, it wasn't what you expected, was it?
No, not at all. No, it's very
Before
enjoyable.
we conclude this interview, is there anything you'd like to add, alter, change?
No, just to thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed listening to your previous guests.
Thanks,
very much indeed. And the thing that makes me tick is knowing what makes other people tick. Consequently, I mentioned briefly that I'm an avid reader, and I read all sorts of things, generally non-fiction. But my favourite, I would say, is biographies, autobiographies. And I love to know what makes people tick. So podcasts like this, with your previous guests and those that will follow me, keep up the good work, and I look forward to listening to that too, to hear what makes other people tick. Thank you very much.
Simon, as ever, mate, you're an absolute gent.
Thank you, Paul. You too. Cheers. Appreciate it.